The spectrogram shivered like a taut violin string, a single blade of tone cutting through static. On a night when the telescope should have been listening to the hush between stars, the pipeline lit up in a color no one forgets, a narrowband carrier, drifting with the whisper of orbital motion, so clean it felt carved. Head snapped up, breath caught. A technician whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. This should be impossible. You can picture it, the waterfall plot cascading in real time, a bright thread slanting across the screen like a comet with purpose. A classic technosignature silhouette. Then the second gasp. The exact frequency landed inside a band guarded by federal hands, a sliver of spectrum where agencies do not like surprises. Within heartbeats, the defense spectrum managers pushed a key that has only one meaning. Lock. Not a solution. Not a verdict. A hold, tight as a tourniquet, on what could be spoken, when, and in how many hertz of truth. What you are about to hear will recalibrate how you think about silence. Because silence in science is never empty. It is full of rules, alarms, and rooms where phones are set face down. The researchers watched their miracle get a badge and a gate. The candidate did not care. On the screen it continued to breathe, a steady inhale and exhale of frequency drift like a heartbeat recorded from someone sleeping in a lightless room. But the humans did care. Every action from this point would run on two rails. The clean, relentless logic of the signal pipeline and the murkier geometry of national interest spectrum custody. Listen closely. A narrowband tone is a razor. Nature loves wide, messy noise. Life, or machines built by life, prefer tight focus. The pipeline knows this. It triages with thresholds honed by years of false alarms and stubborn hope. But once a candidate sits on a protected channel, transparency collides with rules designed for submarines, spacecraft, and organisms far closer than Proxima. Public channels go quiet. Internal channels narrow. Every sentence gets measured like a component on an engineering bench, checked for spillage that might reveal exactly which slice of the sky was whispering and precisely where on the spectral scale it stood. The chain tightens. First, the telescope pipeline. Raw voltages digested into spectra, spectra into detections, detections into candidates. Second, the signal triage. On-off pointing to see if the source rides with the sky or clings to the ground, polarization checks to feel the twist of its electric spine, beam comparisons to prove it is not a side lobe masquerade. Third, a jurisdictional fork that almost no one outside the room ever sees. When a tone falls inside a guarded band, a message travels to Spectrum Authority, where custodians keep maps of what is allowed to live where, and of things that exist but will never be admitted in public. Then comes the quiet, not because anyone has given up, but because the law of disclosure has switched rooms. Is the silence hiding a civilization, or concealing our own machinery? That question hangs in the stale air like a pendulum, crossing back and forth with each new query. The scientists are not naive. They know that extraordinary signals usually dissolve under a bright enough light. But the sight of a clean, drifting line where only a handful of highly managed systems are supposed to speak is the kind of sight that rearranges a day, a week, a career. You can feel the pull yourself. Think about the first time you realized the night sky was not a ceiling but a sea. Now imagine a lighthouse beam briefly sweeping that sea, then pointing directly into a restricted harbor. The emails gain verbs like escalate and deconflict. The note from the custodians is clipped and careful. Dissemination limits apply while deconfliction proceeds. The word that matters is while. While means the team can move, but every motion is watched. While means the telescope can point again, but the precise digits that tick on the spectral axis will not see daylight until someone with a different badge says yes. While means the story is happening, and you may not get to know the best details yet. You might feel the urge to shout at the screen. Do it. That frustration is honest. This tension between open science and protected spectrum is not a plot twist bolted on for drama. It is how reality handles the edge where curiosity grazes security. And it is happening now, in rooms where coffee cools untouched and the air smells like ozone and anxiety. A research lead stands, rubs at tired eyes, and says the only words that make sense. Get replication at offset frequencies, keep the exact channel off any public machine, and document every knob we touch. What is a lock, really? Not a wall, but a narrowing hallway. The team can continue, but quietly. They can share methods, but not the precise hertz that turn their lungs to glass. They can explore the sky around the coordinate without saying where the pin sits. They can ask a sister telescope across the continent to listen just above and just below, like a pianist looking for a melody by testing the keys beside it. If the tone is ours, some classified whisper wearing the clothes of a star, it will betray itself with geography, timing, or guilty harmonics. If it is not, then the hallway will feel longer with each step. You are part of this. Tell me where you are watching from, because the search that starts in one desert or on one mountain passes through all of us. Like the balloon that inflates unevenly, news swells in some directions and remains thin in others. You can help decide where it grows. Like the skyscraper raised in the Stone Age, a single narrowband line asks a civilization to build scaffolding faster than anyone planned. For more content, like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. The telescope listens again. The tone is there, drifting as if the emitter is turning its face while speaking. The waterfall plot paints a second streak, a cousin to the first, and then a third, as the sky rolls and the Earth leans into its rotation. In another building, spectrum custodians compare logs that may never be public. On the ground by the dish, a portable receiver prowls for guilty hardware, eyes narrowed, ears hungry. Above it all, the question keeps its shape like a constellation you cannot unsee. And inside the hallway, a door has just opened to a room where the meaning of flagged must be rebuilt from the first principle. One breath, one hertz, one choice at a time, because the first domino has tipped and nothing is still. The room shifts from awe to procedure in a heartbeat, like a control tower snapping from sunrise to storm protocol. Screens split, logs begin to pour. Someone opens a console that looks like a chessboard for electricity. The word flagged lands in the queue with the weight of a sealed envelope, not a verdict, but a summons. Watch closely now. This is where mystery is fed into a machine built to separate wonder from wishful noise. A flagged event in a search for technosignatures is not a headline. It is a hypothesis written in electricity. The anatomy is unmistakable when it is real. A tone as thin as a hair laid across the cosmos, narrowband and deliberate, a carrier that drifts because the source and the earth are both moving, like two dancers circling in different rooms yet tugging the same floorboards. Nature prefers choruses, broad, thermal, chaotic. Technology prefers a solo, tight, careful, stingingly precise. You can hear the philosophy of an engineer inside that razor line. Pipelines exist to turn that philosophy into action. Raw voltages become spectra. Spectra become detections. Detections become candidates. And a candidate that looks like intent gets the mark that says do not ignore. The system starts with triage that would make a surgeon proud. On-off pointing comes first. Point at the source, then away, then back again, carving the sky into an experiment. If the tone follows the telescope, it has a celestial accent. If it clings to the ground like a stubborn burr, the culprit is likely human. You can feel the stakes in the slewing motors, the way the dish nudges the night as if asking it to speak plainly. Polarization checks step in next, turning the signal like a gem under a loop. Some emitters twist the electric field in characteristic ways. A natural maser will not wear the same polarization clothes as a phased array built by a defense contractor. Multi-beam vetoes sharpen the knife further. If the observatory listens with several ears at once, and the tone splashes across them all with equal strength, that is the signature of a local intruder blooming in the near field. The sky usually sings like a distant singer caught by only one microphone, or maybe two that overlap. A microwave oven sings like a crowd rushing the stage. Then the catalogs take their turn, great ledgers of everything known to shout across the sky. Satellite ephemerides, radar schedules, commercial beacons, persistent troublemakers that have harassed radio astronomers for years. Each one checked like a passport swipe at a quiet border. This is not bureaucracy. This is a memory of civilization's own voice laid out on a table, so the alien possibility is not just romantic, but earned. Every negative result tightens the story. Only persistence and strangeness survive this gauntlet. A tone that refuses to die when the telescope looks away and back. A drift that matches no simple ground track or orbital catalog. A spectrum so clean it feels like a drumhead tuned by an obsessive hand. If a candidate stands after all that, the pipeline elevates it from maybes into attention. This is the moment where frequency becomes politics. You need to know a quiet truth about radio astronomy. Where a signal lives on the dial matters as much as how it looks. The sky is mapped onto bands the way a city is mapped onto districts. Some lanes are open boulevards shared by many devices. Some are cul-de-sacs reserved for emergency vehicles. Some carry a golden rope where science is supposed to be safe from the market's chatter. When a suspiciously perfect tone lands in a band assigned to federal users, it does not just glint. It sets off a chain of stewardship that stretches far beyond the observatory fence. Escalation in this context is not theater. It is care. A message goes to spectrum custodians who hold the atlas of what is permitted to live where, and a shadow version of what may exist without public admission. The word lock arrives like a hand on the volume knob. It does not mute the science. It narrows who may speak and how precisely they may name the hertz. Think of it like entering a clean room. You can continue the experiment, but you must gown up, speak softly, and leave your dusty shoes at the door. While the lock holds, the scientific machine does not stall. It adapts. Replication now happens at offset frequencies, just above and just below the exact channel, like a safecracker testing the tumblers beside the forbidden notch. Independent dishes listen from other latitudes where local interference wears a different mask. A second pipeline searches archival data for cousins with the same peculiar drift slope, because a genuine transmitter in space will scrawl its signature across different nights with the patience of a lighthouse, while a secret on Earth is often bound to a timetable, a geography, or an engineering fingerprint it cannot hide. You deserve to feel the tension here. On one side, the duty to publish, to lay coordinates and hertz on a table where any observatory on Earth can try the key and confirm or destroy a dream. On the other side, the duty to avoid painting a target on sensitive systems that keep airplanes safe, submarines unseen, or satellites obedient. The lock is where those duties shake hands without smiling. You are not being kept from the truth. You are being kept from the coordinates for a while so that truth can be separated from collateral damage. Inside the lab, the RFI hunt goes predatory. Near-field scanners prowl the racks. Cables are reseated with the care of detonating ordnance. Power supplies are swapped. Analog-to-digital converters are interrogated because intermodulation, hardware mixing two unrelated signals into a fake third, has fooled very smart people before. Stray spurs, dirty clocks, harmonics that bloom like ghost branches around a real trunk. Each is a suspect. The team knows what guilt looks like. Modulation fingerprints that match terrestrial gear, harmonics marching at neat intervals, sidebands that dance like reflections in a local mirror. Anything that reeks of Earth is ejected without sentiment. The hours stretch. The carrier keeps drifting with a poise that taunts dismissal. A sister telescope catches a whisper in the offset channel. Not a twin, but a relative with the same tilt, like finding a shoeprint one tile over from where you expected. A satellite pass over the region is checked and cleared. A known radar test window ends without the tone dimming. In a silent conference, shoulders draw tight. You can feel the narrative leaning, not into romance, but into rigor. The path where the extraordinary is allowed to walk as long as its feet leave marks that can be measured. If you are holding your breath, let it out and take another. This is the pace of real discovery, the kind that feels like a violin string pulled taut across a chasm, humming with both risk and promise. A flagged signal is not a trophy. It is a threshold you cross barefoot because the floor might be glass. And right now the hallway is lengthening, the air is cooling, and somewhere behind a government door, another set of ears has started listening to the same thin line that refuses to admit what it is, while a quiet clock counts to a moment that is coming whether anyone is ready or not. Phones start buzzing like trapped hornets on a windowsill. A coordinator steps into the corridor and lowers their voice, as if sound itself might leak signal. A single line in a protected band has pulled a thread that runs through cabinets of law, through rooms with badge readers instead of doorknobs, through a map of the radio spectrum that looks less like a rainbow and more like a city under curfew. Somewhere far from the dish, a desk lamp clicks on over the nation's frequency ledger, and a custodian traces a finger along a narrow avenue where only certain vehicles may pass. The word you hear is plain and heavy: locked. In the United States, there are two hands on the radio chessboard. One is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, keeper of the lanes used by federal agencies, from spacefarers to weather watchers to fleets that do not advertise their routes. The other is the Federal Communications Commission, steward of non-federal life, from broadcasters to cell towers to a million private machines humming at the edges of our hearing. Each hand moves by the same book, an allocation table where bands are zoned like districts, and each district has its permitted speech. You can imagine the table as a cathedral of rules, every column a stained glass window that filters the sun in a particular way. Inside those federal districts live assignments that belong to defense, to space agencies, to research networks whose acronyms you only see in footnotes. The public can read the street names, but not always the occupants, because some addresses were frosted glass. When a tone like a polished needle lands in one of those lanes, the custodian does not throw a sheet over the sky. They do something subtler, like turning a dimmer switch. Information that would normally pour into public air is reduced to a narrow, supervised stream. Not a gag on the science, but a muzzle on the exact coordinates and the precise number of hertz, while people whose business is hidden verify whether the sound belongs to them. A lock is not a stamp of truth. It is a hold on disclosure while two worlds compare calendars. In one world, researchers ask whether a line's Doppler drift feels like an orbit and whether its purity survives the cruel glare of replication. In the other, spectrum managers ask whether a quiet system was scheduled to whisper, or whether a test set on a plane with no name accidentally threw its voice across the mountains. You, watching this, might feel the urge to pry at the door with bare hands. That urge is the pulse of public science. It beats alongside a second pulse that says some frequencies are armor, and armor is not worn to be admired. Beyond one country's borders, the architecture gets even larger. The International Telecommunication Union binds the planet's transmitters to a common grammar so that ships can hear beacons and satellites can hear commands. Their radio regulations are like an atlas you can unfold on any continent and still read the rivers the same way. Some corridors across that atlas carry sanctuaries for listening, to shield the faintest whispers nature provides. One of those sanctuaries lies around the hydrogen line, the breath of neutral atoms near 1,420 megahertz, where humanity agreed to soften its own voice. The protection is real, but it is never a spell. Spurious noise leaks. Edges blur. Machines grow teeth where treaties thought they had drawn gums. In practical terms, a lock means the observatory can keep working with its hands behind its back. Methods can be discussed, bands can be named in broad strokes. L-band, S-band, the rough neighborhoods where the line lives. But the exact address cannot be handed to the crowd until deconfliction is complete. If that bristles, let it. That bristle is the feeling of two duties scraping against each other like tectonic plates. One duty says the coordinates are a key that the whole world must test. The other says coordinates are also a map to equipment that does not want crowds. Inside the observatory, the plan adapts like water finding a new course. Independent dishes are cued, not to the precise notch, but to the steps just above and below, searching for siblings that would betray the presence of a family rather than a single ghost. If a classified transmitter is the culprit, it will often carry the fingerprints of Earth, a timetable tied to a testing range, a geometry bound to ground tracks, a set of sidebands that expose its engineering. If the tone does not wear terrestrial fingerprints, it earns the right to keep breathing while the managers check their vaults. You might wonder who can actually say stop, who can tell a scientist that a number must be written in the vague rather than the exact. The answer is not a villain in a shadowed office. It is a chain of memoranda and standing agreements that predate any one anomaly. Observatories sign onto interference frameworks the way pilots sign weather briefs. In exchange for protected windows and quiet zones, stretches of land and policy where transmitters keep their elbows tucked, the observatories agree that, when certain alarms ring, they will measure their words until the alarm is cleared. Picture the National Radio Quiet Zone as a vast library reading room. Everyone knows to whisper there, and librarians have the right to shush. None of this declares a mystery resolved. A lock does not say extraterrestrial or terrestrial. It says the next few steps will be taken with softer shoes. During those steps, the government's custodians look for evidence of their own reflection in the glass. They check logs that will not be posted to a public archive. They ask if a satellite aimed a narrow training laser of radio at a ground station, if a radar stretched a test pulse down a corridor that brushed the observatory by accident, if a field trial tuned a device that was supposed to be invisible. Each yes or no moves the dimmer a little. Meanwhile, the team that first heard the tone keeps peeling back layers inside their own house. They watch for harmonics spaced like fence posts, for intermodulation products that march in lockstep, for polarization quirks that match common arrays. If a housefly is trapped in their violin, they mean to find it. And yet the carrier's drift keeps gliding with the patience of a planet. When the dish slews away, the line thins. When it returns, the line blooms again, as if the night itself were practicing a signature. You and I are standing at the boundary where curiosity meets governance, and that boundary is never clean. It wavers like heat above asphalt. If you feel the heat, you are not imagining it. A civilization that can speak in narrowband whispers across light years is not an everyday hypothesis. But it is also not a reason to discard the careful etiquette that keeps airplanes in the sky and deep-sea boats silent. The etiquette is not the enemy. It is the cost of listening at the edge of human power. Out in the hallway, a new message arrives. Not permission, not denial, only a sentence that leaves room for breath. Continue your tests, keep the exact frequency sealed, expect an update when cross-checks conclude. The lamp at the custodian's desk is still on. The waterfall plot is still carving light into the screen. Between those two rooms stretches a wire made of procedure, tension, and patience. And that wire hums now like a string tuned tight enough to sing without breaking. The dish turns like a cathedral dome aligning with a secret star. Under the lock, the work does not slow, it sharpens. The team moves as if walking across ice that sings. Light steps, careful wait, no wasted gestures. They begin with a maneuver that feels like safecracking. Tune just above the forbidden notch, then just below, portrait and mirror, never saying the exact coordinates aloud. If the tone is real and not a trick of one narrow key, its relatives may appear on the neighboring teeth of the spectrum's comb, breathing with the same strange drift. Think of a lighthouse beam catching the edge of two windows in a row. You do not need the street address to know the house is there. A sister observatory hears the call without hearing the secret. It listens from a different latitude where the sky tilts at another angle and local machines wear different disguises. If the line belongs to Earth, geography will bend it. A transmitter tied to a fence line or a runway leaves footprints that respect roads and orbits. A satellite locked to a belt above the equator has a pulse like a drum trained to one rhythm. A test radar sampling the horizon leaves combs and chirps that march like soldiers at even intervals. But a voice that comes from nowhere near us rides the physics of celestial motion. Doppler drift that curves with Earth's rotation and the source's path, a glide that feels less like marching and more like tides. Inside the lab, archival data opens like a fossil drawer. The team asks the most ruthless question in science. Has this pattern walked here before without being noticed? They search months of spectra for cousins with the same slope of drift, the same surgical thinness, the same refusal to bloom into static. If a transmitter in space speaks with patience, it may have left fingerprints days or years apart, hiding in plain sight like a needle in a tapestry that only glints when you tilt it just right. Cross-matching begins. Nights when the dish stared near the same right ascension. Hours when the same band was quiet except for a single hair of tone. Intervals when the local environment was electrically calm. The near-field hunt turns predatory. A handheld spectrum sniffer prowls the racks, nosing along power cords and clock lines the way a dog scents a trail under snow. Engineers pull panels and touch the frames of equipment with the backs of their fingers, feeling for the faint vibration of a faulty fan or a transformer chewing its own teeth. Oscillators are swapped like hearts in an operating theater. Local oscillators can whisper lies. Intermodulation can forge a counterfeit carrier when two honest signals collide inside a cheap component. Anything that can mix will mix, and a counterfeit will march with telltale harmonics spaced like fence posts, an ugly regularity that betrays its parentage. Polarization is tested again, more finely now like rotating a diamond to catch a flaw. Some arrays on Earth have polarization habits that are stubborn as dialect. A phased system may favor one hand of twist. A natural maser will carry the imprint of molecules and magnetic fields rather than a designer's blueprint. The team logs the electric fields tilt with the care of surveyors, laying out a nation's border. Even the noise around the tone is studied. Human machines are not silent neighbors. They track mud into the spectrum, faint sidebands, digital spurs, clock teeth clicking like distant metronomes. If any of that mud matches a known piece of hardware, the case weakens. Replication proceeds like a ballet danced in separate cities. Observatory 2 listens near the top edge of the safe offset. Observatory 3 listens near the bottom. Timestamps are folded through celestial mechanics to remove Earth's own sway, a mathematical barycentering that feels like steadying a camera on a boat. You, watching this, are allowed to feel a throb of awe. A civilization is aligning its instruments to cancel its planet's heartbeat so it can hear a whisper that might not belong to it. That is what it means to be human in the age of radio. Untangling our own motion from the universes so we do not mistake ourselves for everything we meet. Catalogs grow teeth. The satellite almanacs are checked down to obscure vehicles that transmit rarely and quietly. Air route radars are compared against their test windows. Amateur beacons and commercial experiments are scraped from public ledgers, then from mailing lists, then from rumor, because rumors sometimes carry more schedule than pride. In parallel, the facility's own signature is mapped like a fingerprint. Every clock spur, every Ethernet harmonic, every power supply wind turned into a ledger of sins the building might commit. Cross-correlation begins to look like detective work. Overlay the lab's hum against the tone's neighborhood and search for any beat that lines up like a shoeprint. Criteria for execution are pinned to the wall. If the line reveals modulation fingerprints that match common encoders, it dies. If intermodulation products bloom around it at predictable spacings, it dies. If harmonics ladder away from it like evenly spaced rungs, it dies. If it spills sidebands that twitch in time with a spinning motor or the tick of a switching supply, it dies. Nothing sentimental survives this part. The romance is relegated to the coffee cups while the analysis walks with a scalpel. Hours stretch into the kind of quiet that working scientists mistake for weather. Then a murmur. The independent dish reports a glint in the offset channel, not loud, but slanted with the same drift sign. The slope is not a twin, but it is kin, close enough to tighten throats. At the main site, the line returns when the dish returns and slips away when the dish steps aside. A portable antenna on the ground listens for a ground source and finds none with the same clean skeleton. A test signal is injected into the front end to prove the system can be fooled. The system obliges for a while, then shrugs off the imitation and waits for the real cut of tone to edge back into place. You need to feel what that does to a room. It pinches time. People stand without knowing they have stood. The waterfall plot is a river now, and everyone is reading its surface like trackers over a streambed, searching for the twin ripples that betray a body moving beneath. The decision is not whether to go public with the exact hertz. Those remain under glass, but whether the anomaly has earned the right to be described in public language without coordinates. That means methods can be written down in a way that another team on another mountain can reproduce the chase without being handed the keyhole. Drafts begin. They speak of bands by family names, L-band, S-band, never street numbers. They describe on-off pointing, polarization rotations, multi-beam behavior, archival searches, and the precise mathematics of drift fitting without exposing the actual figure that made Hart's trip. They explain how a classified Earth source would tend to repeat with geography, how an orbital pattern would write a telltale sinusoid across nights, how a stationary ground transmitter would lack the celestial wobble baked into every honest star. They keep the words clean and the edges soft. Outside that careful prose, the signal breathes again. The drift holds just enough shape to keep patience from unraveling. A second facility, far from the first, hears a faint cousin near the upper offset, then loses it to weather, then hears it again on a clearer night with the same tilt, as if the sky had turned its face and offered the same cheekbone to a different camera. No victory music plays. Only the steady hiss of cosmic background and the thin line that dares everyone in the room to say what it is without breaking a rule they do not control. The lock remains. The work continues. The tone has not named itself, yet it keeps arriving with the composure of a metronome buried under waves. Somewhere behind guarded doors, logs are being compared with a fervor that has nothing to do with wonder and everything to do with responsibility. Somewhere under open sky, dishes keep leaning into the night, asking the same question with carefully different words. And in the space between those worlds hangs a line of light on a screen, narrow as a wire and hard as a promise, shaking the air of two continents without yet revealing why it refuses to go away. The hum of the control room carries a memory that the walls have learned to keep. It is the memory of other bright lines that once stood like spears in the noise and asked to be believed. The researchers do not speak of legends as trophies. They speak of them as autopsies. Each scar in the archive is a lesson written in electricity. You can feel the temperature drop half a degree when someone says, softly, we have been here before. A name crosses the air like a delicate warning. The candidate from Proxima. It began as a narrow blade that behaved like intention, tight, single-minded, drifting with a poise that felt planetary. The first hours tasted like lightning on the tongue. Then the analysis turned predatory. Correlations were drawn not just across the sky, but across the lab's own heartbeat. Intermodulation stepped out from behind the curtain like a stagehand caught in the spotlight. Two mundane signals, mixed inside fallible electronics, had birthed a counterfeit so convincing it could have sold a miracle. Drift that looked celestial was stitched from the changing guts of hardware, a chimeric wobble that mimicked the Doppler sway of an orbit. When that realization landed, it did not sound like disappointment. It sounded like relief sharpened by respect. The lesson was cruel and generous at once. Nature produces plenty of mischief, but our machines are the better imposters. You can picture the anatomy of that unmasking. A spiderweb of frequencies appeared, faint side tones and offset cousins with relationships too neat to be cosmic. They marched at intervals that spoke in the grammar of circuitry, not in the long vowels of stars. The supposed carrier had siblings that only existed when certain clocks ticked or certain cables flexed. Remove a component, and the family portrait fell apart. Put it back, and the portrait reassembled with eerie loyalty. It felt like catching a forger, because the brushstrokes repeated in places no real hand would repeat them. Across the years sits an older ghost, the one the public still loves to whisper about. It was a burst that lived for only a breath, long enough for the receiver to sweep across it, short enough that a second look arrived to find emptiness. It hid near the breath of hydrogen, in the quiet water where radio astronomers have asked the world to tread lightly. The legal quiet was true. The romantic inference was not guaranteed. The burst did not speak again. It owned a single window of time and then abandoned its lease. Decades of patient ears offered it chances to repeat. The universe did not comply. The signal remained a photo of a footprint with no matching shoe. Hypotheses multiplied with the seasons. Rare natural flukes, terrestrial misfires, data quirks sharpened by expectation. None had the power to turn that single shout into a story with chapters. These are not defeats. They are calibration points driven into the ground, so the tent of wonder does not collapse in wind. You, watching this with your breath pressed shallow, deserve the candor. Most candidates that look perfect on first blush are wearing makeup. The makeup washes off under rain made of replication. Multi-site observations strip away local masks. Multi-epoch campaigns catch liars who cannot keep the same accent twice. Instruments interrogate themselves until their faults confess, like mirrors admitting they were warped all along. Frequency context sits in the middle of this discipline like a compass. Where a tone lives informs the ritual it must endure. A band that science has asked the world to shelter carries fewer excuses for mess, yet even sanctuaries leak. A band shared with commerce hums with traffic. Signals found there must survive a gauntlet of mundane suspects before they are allowed to daydream. A band allocated to federal frameworks adds a second layer of etiquette. Transparency is still the ethic, but coordinates become porcelain, handled with both hands while stewards check their inventories. None of this decides truth. It decides the path truth has to walk. Listen to the method become a kind of poetry. On-off pointing not as a checkbox, but as a lantern swung over a dark river to catch whether the reflection moves with the boat or with the shore. Polarization as a fingerprint dusted onto glass, hunting for the swirl that belongs to a designed array rather than to molecules and magnetism. Multi-beam comparisons as triangulation among friends, asking whether a voice stands in one doorway or echoes all over the house. Archival searches as time travel, panning through silt for flecks that glitter at the same angle across seasons. Each technique carries both blade and bomb. It can cut the romance away, and it can protect the romance that survives from being called reckless. You may feel the ache of that paradox. Wonder lives here, but it is not allowed to eat until it has worked. The people at the consoles invite that austerity every night because it is the only way to keep from drowning in stories we tell ourselves. They talk about modulation fingerprints as if they were knots in rope, about harmonics as ladders a local transmitter cannot help building, about sidebands as mud tracked in by heavy boots. When a candidate grows those boots, it is walked out the door without ceremony. When it does not, the room grows quiet in a different key. That quiet is not triumphant. It is bracing, like the moment a climber clips into a line and feels the harness take weight. One more precedent breathes across the room like a weather front. The case where a pristine tone died because it refused to be anywhere except where the dish happened to be. A true celestial whisper should not cling to a parking lot. It should stand in the sky. That candidate had loved the building too much. It vanished when the wind shifted at ground level and returned when a door opened. The data made a map of guilt that no galaxy would draw. Another candidate wore a different sin. It returned every time a nearby network changed channels, its drift a marionette tugged by terrestrial scheduling. These memories do not dull the appetite, they hone it. You are allowed to ask, right now, whether the current line will earn the same ending as so many others. Your question is the correct instrument. The answer can only be bought by more signal. That is the discipline's harsh mercy. It trusts time more than thrill. Replication, offset listening, polarization anatomy, archival trawls, hardware audits. Each step is a rung on a ladder that goes up into whether you cannot forecast. And yet you keep climbing with them because this is the work that rewrites the laws of the cosmos when the cosmos is ready to be rewritten. The screen keeps its steady waterfall, a river of night in thin bands of color, and the line keeps carving its diagonal with a patience that taunts both romance and cynicism. Somewhere in a vault of regulations, stewards continue their cross-checks with eyes that do not care for poetry. Somewhere on distant hills, other dishes lean into the same band without saying the exact syllable of hertz that binds them together. Between those hills and that vault, the precedent of caution wraps itself around the present tense like a constrictor that protects as it squeezes. The room breathes with it, waiting for the next data to either erase the line's face or give it cheekbones that no trick of hardware can copy. A hush settles that is not scientific, but martial, the kind of quiet that follows a command you cannot hear. Somewhere past the perimeter fence, a spectrum custodian leans over a console that does not need a window and begins to ask whether a beautiful line on an astronomer's screen might also be a lifeline on a battlefield. This is where two kinds of listening collide. One listens for the first distant neighbor. The other listens to keep neighbors alive. Imagine the radio spectrum as a city at night. Some streets are markets, noisy and lawful. Some are libraries where whispers are protected by etiquette and glass. Some are alleyways kept clear for ambulances that must pass without warning. Defense lives in those clear lanes, moving messages with the precision of surgeons, narrowband carriers that can pierce miles of weather, radar pulses that stitch the sky into range and bearing, telemetry whispers that guide machines you never see. If you publish the address of an ambulance route, you have not just mapped a city, you have taught the city where to place a barricade. The caretakers of federal lanes know this better than anyone. They are not poets of wonder. They are accountants of risk. A narrow tone that looks like intent could be a training beacon from a satellite whose job is to be heard by only one ear. It could be a test pattern from a phased array exploring a new waveform. It could be the throat clearing of a radar under maintenance, sending a thin probe through the night to check whether its heart still beats. Each of those has a right to privacy born from responsibility. If the frequency of such a thing leaks into public obsession, the leak does not make science braver. It makes operators blind. You who want the coordinates now are not wrong to want them. Curiosity is not a vice. Yet the people who hold the lock are not villains grown fat on secrecy. They are air traffic controllers for invisible roads. They are the kind of minds who count the ways a published hertz could be turned into a map for interference, jamming, or worse. When they request a pause, they are not folding a mystery into a vault to kill it. They are buying time to ask whether a disclosure would light up a target that did not consent to being lit. International rules give this caution a spine. The planet keeps a ledger of allocations where every band has a role written in bureaucratic script that looks dry until you recognize it as a peace treaty between noise and need. Some windows are set aside for listening. Places around the breath of hydrogen near 1,420 megahertz where nations agreed to soften their own voice so the universe could be heard. The same books give formal shelter to civil navigation, to meteorology, to deep space commands, and they also carve corridors for systems whose names arrive with badges. Protection is an intention, not a magic spell. Spurious signals still leak. Edges still fray. Etiquette must be enforced by humans who get hungry and tired. Deconfliction is the ritual that keeps the etiquette alive. It means comparing a candidate tone against schedules that will never be trending anywhere. It means asking range officers whether a test window opened over a desert you will never step on. It means checking whether a satellite with a sterile designation sent a calibration whisper to a ground station that prefers not to be photographed. Sometimes the answer is yes, and the quiet is kept for good reason. Sometimes the answer is no, and the quiet releases its grip by a few words, enough to let scientists describe the anomaly without pointing strangers at the front door. There is a harder truth that deserves daylight. A signal that looks extraterrestrial can be born of our own discretion. Classified systems are designed to live low in the grass, to look like nature to anyone but the intended receiver. Narrowband carriers with careful drift are not the sole domain of imagined beacons. They are tools we already use. If a research team publishes an exact frequency that sits on the shoulder of such a system, even without intent, they can give a compass to people who do not care about telescopes. That is why the lock exists. Not to smother wonder, but to keep wonder from becoming an accomplice. Inside the observatory, this logic does not taste sweet, but it does taste necessary. The researchers keep writing their methods with the precision of surgeons who know juries will read their notes. They retain bands by family name rather than exact syllable. They invite independent replication at offsets that respect the gag. They show their drift fits, their polarization tests, their multibeam behavior, their archival trawls, all without drawing a road to a transmitter that may be wearing camouflage. This is not capitulation. It is choreography between open inquiry and guarded infrastructure. Speak with me plainly for a moment. You are right to demand that discovery does not vanish into classified air. You are also right, perhaps reluctantly, to allow that not every coordinate belongs to the square of public debate on the day of first contact with data. Science keeps its soul by being verifiable. Security keeps its purpose by not handing adversaries a blueprint. Both are real. Both have teeth. The art is in the handshake that stings but does not break fingers. There are safeguards to keep the handshake honest. The national tables that govern spectrum include language that allows withholding details when the national interest requires it, but they also describe the allocations openly. The protected astronomy windows exist because scientists argued for them and governments listened, imperfectly but measurably. There are quiet zones where transmitters bow their heads as if in a chapel. None of these are perfect shields. All of them are proof that coexistence is not a fantasy. Back at the console, the narrow line drifts with that same measured grace, like a sail catching a hidden breeze. The lock remains, a dimmer turned low rather than a breaker thrown. Somewhere on a base with no signposts, a logbook is being cross-checked against the clock that runs the world. Somewhere on a hill now rhymed with frost, a second dish turns its face to the same band by a different name. The two worlds continue their parallel audit, one of truth, one of risk, without sharing their notebooks yet. If you hear frustration in the air, you are also hearing care. The care keeps airplanes on paths, keeps ships in lanes, keeps test gear from announcing itself to people who would rather listen than learn. The care does not love mystery for its own sake. It loves systems that are allowed to work. It is rational, even if the internet would prefer a villain with a switch. And tonight, while that rational caution holds, the line keeps breathing across a screen that glows like a tide pool in the dark, daring both communities to decide how much light to pour into it before they know what creature is making the ripple that refuses to fade.